What is the story of your worst date? Story 1. I went out one night with some of my girlfriends. I was the young, naive girl in our group. We went to this bar that is on a lake and had a great time drinking margaritas. I met a guy. We danced, laughed, really clicked. My girlfriends were ready to go. I didn't want to. He was making promises that he could get me home, but the DD in our group put her foot down and said we had to go. We exchanged numbers and made promises to talk soon, and the DD took us girls home. The next day, I got a text from him. I'm so excited because he had to be interested if he texts the next day, right? We make plans for dinner and he offers to pick me up. Him. So, pick you up at the same address. Me. Same address. What are you talking about? Him. The house I dropped you off at. Me. You didn't drop me off. Him. Shut up. We had sex in your driveway. Me. No, we did not. Him. Yes, we did. Me. I'm really confused, and I think you are too. But I'm not the girl you went home with last night. So the date died before it ever got started. Grateful for the DD though. She was a lifesaver. Story 2. I was 28 or 29 years old at the time. We'd been talking for approximately 10 minutes over one drink. Him. So do you want kids? 'Cause if you do, you don't want to wait too long. You're drying up. Me. Him. It's biology. Don't be mad. Then there was the time I met a guy for coffee. It was like 9 or 10 a.m. The coffee shop was busy but fairly quiet. He'd ask me a question, I'd answer, and he'd loudly exclaim, "Nice. High five." He did this like 4 or 5 times before I had to tell him to stop. I didn't want to keep high-fiving. Story 3. I had an old college friend come to visit me and stay for a weekend. Knew her in college. She was amazingly intelligent and fascinating, but we were both spoken for at the time. Years later I got Facebook, and she was one of the first people to find me. Both of us were single. She asked if I wanted to date her. I said hell yes. I was thrilled at the prospect. The short version. The weekend was spent listening to her narcissistic bullshit. She told me jokes that are as old as the internet, reworded to sound like personal life anecdotes. She told me all this insane edgelord shit she used to or still does, like taunting police back in 2009, or sneaking Cuban products back to America when the embargo was still in place. She tried to start a fight with a bouncer when we went to a bar, and she forgot her ID back at my house, a block away. We visited some of my best friends, and the moment we parted she talked shit about them nonstop. My brother came by since I texted him I was out and hung out. She talked to him for quite a while. He left, then she spent the rest of the night talking about how attractive he was. At this point I was just counting the hours until she left. I was no longer interested in her. She finally left, and I get a text that night. You failed all my tests. You laughed at my jokes that weren't really jokes. You didn't defend me against the bouncer, and you aren't interested in my passion, fighting bouncers and cops. And you sat there and took it while I talked about your brother. Also, I don't find you physically attractive. I didn't reply. I just cut my losses and fell asleep. Several months later at 4 a.m. I got another text from her. Same text as I just wrote, only this was out of nowhere. And the injury following insult. I gave her absolute hell for it and blocked her on Facebook. She then made duplicate Facebook accounts and threatened me on those too. She gave up eventually, but I dodged a effing bullet. Story 4. My freshman year of undergrad, my TA for a comp sci class I was taking asked me on a date. He seemed normal/nice enough, so I agreed, and we went to dinner at a random restaurant in the city. He ordered for me, which was not my favorite, but I was like whatever, cause he seemed to know the place really well. He was a narcissistic weirdo, and he talked about himself the entire time and kept asking me/telling me to pay attention. He told me all about his ex-fiancée and basically went on a rant about how white women are so entitled, so now he's only interested in black queens. It was making my skin crawl. I felt physically ill. At the end, I wanted to split the bill. He said he would pay since I'd be paying him later, wink wink. I didn't even know what to say or do. I just stared at him and excused myself to go to the bathroom, and I left through a side door. Luckily, there was only 2 weeks left in the semester, so I only saw him again for the final. Story 5. So many stories, but one of the worst. Sorry it's a bit long. I matched with this guy on Tinder, and he offered to take me out to dinner. I thought that sounded nice, so later that night he picked me up. We were driving, and he asked me where I wanted to go. I told him I was fine with anything. He said, "Okay then," and pulled into Subway. He then told me that he wasn't hungry, but that I should eat. So he stood outside of the Subway and watched while I went in and got myself food. At this point, I was already mentally done, but I wanted to see how much worse it would get. Spoiler, it got so much worse. So I'm sitting in the car with this stupid effing sub on my lap, and he decided that it was a great idea to drive around, specifically through a dark, isolated ravine that was nearby. He drove for about 10 minutes into the ravine, parked the car next to an abandoned tennis court, and said, "Okay, you can eat now." I was just thinking, I really don't want to die here. So I choked down the soggy sub while he stared at me. The second I was done, he pulled the car out and drove me back home. I was so grateful to make it home in one piece that it took me several days to process how F up the entire date was. The cherry on top. At 2 a.m. that night, he came back to my house uninvited, carrying a bag full of stale donuts, and asked me if I wanted to have sex, but it had to be without a condom since he didn't have any. Story 6. So it's not my date, because my bad dates are just boringly regular stuff, but working in bars and restaurants, I've been able to witness some absolute doozies, and boy does this one take the cake. So it's a fairly quiet night, and it's pretty early, and I have a reservation for 6 p.m. for 2 people. Young guy shows up for that reservation about 10 minutes early, tells me he's very nervous, as he's on a first date, and hasn't been on many of them, all that kind of jazz, kinda sweet really. Anyways, I seat him, and the girl arrives, like 30 minutes late. She then proceeds to get extremely drunk. About halfway through the meal though, she answers her phone, takes the call, and starts talking about her date, in front of her date, saying stuff like, "He's not really my type. I don't exactly like him. But I figured I had nothing else planned tonight, so why not?" Young man looks super discouraged, pays his bill, and leaves. He's a nice lad. I've seen him a few times at the bar I work at now. Story 7. Went out with a guy who was a medic in the Navy. He looked nothing like his pictures, but I carried on out of politeness. Over the course of the next 3 hours, he bragged about all of the people he knew who had successfully killed themselves. Bragged about how many times he had encouraged suicidal people to kill themselves and how he had often self-harmed with them. To make things worse, he worked in the hospital and was telling me how he would give depressed patients sharp objects and tell them that it was less paperwork for him to do if they killed themselves. He also didn't have a clue about most medical conditions and would just send people away telling them they're fine. He finished off by telling me about his really messed up family and how his 2 13 to 15-year-old brothers had been arrested for stealing and burning cars. And his sister kept trying to stab all the family members. Suffice to say, I made a swift exit and never went on Tinder again. Story 8. We were both broke, so we went walking around this cute, teeny tiny country town near us, and then got McDonald's to eat in the car so we could chat some more. He almost immediately starts pressuring me for sex because he bought me a cheeseburger, so I owe him, he says. He starts getting pushy, and I say, "Okay, but let's go get some condoms from this gas station that's on the other side of town." I drove for this date, so I took us to the gas station and told him to go get the condoms while I waited. I wait for him to get in the door and go a bit farther into the store before I drive off, leaving him stranded in this tiny gas station in the days before cell phones got popular, in a tiny country town with no bus service, no ride shares, and everything shuts down by 6 p.m. I know from mutual friends he made it home, but they already knew why he'd been ditched at the gas station, so no one cared about his shitty whining about it. Story 9. Back in college, I met this girl and asked her if I could take her out to dinner. She said yes. I was ecstatic. Well, then I had to figure out where to take her to give her an idea of who I am and what I'm about. So I tried to do something that was thoughtful. I've learned that there are two types of gifts, expensive and thoughtful. If you can't do something expensive, which I couldn't, then you'd better go hard on the thoughtful. This was taking place in the U.S. South, but she was a freshman from Pennsylvania. I started thinking about things that were new and interesting to her. The answer came to me in a flash. Bojangles. I would take her to Bojangles. It's cheap, it used to have fairly decent food, but most of all it's Southern, and we'd be able to discuss regional differences in food and culture. Of course, it's also fast food. Really crappy fast food. The evening of the date arrived. I drove her to the place and talked all about fried chicken and the South and tea and how it must be different from the North. We got there and ordered at the register, then moved down to pick up our tray of food. Fancy, huh? We waited and waited. I tried to make some small talk. You know, the small talk you make when something could interrupt your conversation at any moment. Then we waited some more and more. My dinner, fried chicken, was on the tray. The drinks were on the tray. Her sandwich was not. So we stood there with the silence growing more and more awkward. Minutes rolled by that felt like ages. Finally, an employee noticed us standing there and said, "Did you need something?" I said yes, that we needed her sandwich. The employee turned around and grabbed the sandwich from the place it had been sitting the whole time, and standing there, and put it on the tray. It had been there since the beginning. Not a great start. I picked up the tray and started walking back to a table with her, but there was an issue. Bojangles used to have the best sweet tea, so I always got a large one. The cups they use for the larges are the kind that are smaller at the bottom so they'll fit in your cup holder in your car. That's great for a car, but not so great for balancing them on a tray. It fell over. Fortunately, it fell over onto the tray, but not before knocking her drink off of the tray onto the floor. She had gotten the smaller drink, which came in the waxed paper cup instead of the plastic cup that the larges are in. That's important, because it means that when her cup hit the ground at about a 30-degree angle, the cup crushed and launched the liquid inside out like a cannon onto her foot, drenching her in Pepsi or Coke or some soft drink. Being gentlemanly, I went and got her a new drink, got back to the table, and started trying to eat. I had ordered fried chicken, which I realized would mean that I had to eat with my fingers, which was stupid on a first date. Not wanting to look dumber, I decided I'd try to avoid eating with my fingers by using the plastic cutlery provided by the store, which would have been a fine idea if not for the fact that Bojangles only provides you with a spork. Not a fork, not a spoon, not a knife. A spork. A plastic spork, to be exact. I'm trying to pry the chicken off the bone with this plastic spork, and it's going nowhere. I can't get the chicken off the bone. I dug in a little deeper and really pulled, which bent the spork back a little, which served as a spring to launch my chicken breast across the table. I actually caught it before it could hit the floor. I remember thinking to myself, well, just enjoy this chicken because this date is going nowhere. I decided to just forget it and eat the dang chicken with my fingers. She was obviously not going to be going out with me anymore, so I decided not to worry about impressing her. Just try to get out of the situation without looking any dumber than I already did. I reached down and pulled off a nice piece of chicken with my fingers. And I missed my mouth. Seriously. I jammed the chicken onto my face. I don't know how I missed it, but I did. I just missed it, which of course smeared chicken grease all over my cheek. The girl was looking at me like she was waiting for me to tell her, "It's just a prank, bro." I felt so dumb. We finished eating in silence. Finally, I said, "Well, let me take you back to your dorm." I gathered up all the trash on the tray, walked over to the garbage can, and accidentally threw the whole thing into the trash. All of it, cups, the spork, napkins, the tiara, all of it. I looked at the girl, she looked at me, and we both ran to the car. I've had some other bad dating experiences, but this one took the cake. I also remember being shocked when the car started when we were leaving. After the night I'd had, I was fully expecting to have to walk several miles back to campus in the dark.